Episode 4 opens up really continuing on from shortly after the previous episode. And it's kind of cleaning up things that have been taking place over the last few episodes. And at the center of the story are our three mains, which would be Viserys, Rhaenyra, and Daemon. Where there's this continuation kind of Viserys is attempting to bring these two into the fold. And that's what we see playing out here. It starts off with Rhaenyra, where she is in a somewhat more formal setup, vetting potential suitors, where she's on a bit of a tour, going about the kingdom and whatnot, meeting potential suitors. They're coming forth, kind of giving their pitches. You can't really blame her for not being interested in these guys because the one guy is too old, the other one is incredibly young. It's a little bit unclear because she's kind of young herself, right? She's supposed to be 14, 15 or something like that. But this looks like a kid, 11, 12 years old or something like that. And it's understandable as to why she wouldn't be interested in these suitors. It seems like there's not much of a vetting process going on here with regards to how compatible her and these suitors might be. There's greater focus placed on what the alliance might bring from a strategic or political standpoint. Rhaenyra marrying X individual. What lands do they have? What are their military forces? What can they bring to the marriage, rather than how likely said person and Rhaenyra are to be compatible with each other, to have, if not a happy marriage, then at least a stable and comfortable marriage, right? There seems to be little to no consideration for that. I side with her, right? Put forward some worthy suitors that actually make sense if you want her to take them seriously. But sure, there's going to be some disappointment because they've lined up all of these suitors. We see 2 of them. But it's implied that there's been quite a number, well over 20, if not more. And she's rejected all of them because they've likely been ill-suited, just like these 2 that we see. And while returning home, there's some discomfort because it's what kind of reception is she going to get from her father? Because he's insistent that she marries, and her thing is that, and in a sense, she's kind of getting a little bit of leeway beyond what others get because she's at least getting the opportunity to choose for herself. And she's been given a wide array of people to choose from. On the way returning home, they've, are arriving by sea. And not too far from arriving, they cross paths with a dragon, which swoops down, and it turns out that this is Daemon returning from the Stepstones. So on this very day, we have Viserys' 2 original potential heirs arriving. Both of them, in a sense, bringing some kind of drama, family drama, but then also political drama, right? Because Rhaenyra's rejection of these marriages is also, in a sense, not really rejection of alliances, but rather rejection of strengthening or forming new alliances with potential allies. Daemon's return from the Stepstones, Daemon tends to just bring drama, is the first thing. And then him having fought this battle in the Stepstones against the people from the Free Cities, but at the same time in alliance with the Valyrians, there's some political fallout, or there's sure to be some political fallout from that as well. And so with this, we see Viserys and the court readying to meet Rhaenyra, who's returning, and then, unbeknown to them now, Daemon as well. And Daemon arriving on the same day is actually quite fortunate for Rhaenyra because it kind of takes a little bit of the sting, or the wrath might be too strong a word. The annoyance that her father might have otherwise expressed if she'd arrived and he found out, the details of her really rejecting all of these suitors. But instead, Daemon kind of steals the spotlight, thankfully for Rhaenyra, by arriving with this crown as king of the Narrow Sea and kind of drawing attention to himself as he usually does. And I think it points to two things with Daemon: his loyalty, but then also that while he might be a bit irrational, he's not stupid, right? Because he knows how to very quickly put Viserys at ease and by stroking his ego. Where he bends the knee, he offers up his crown, he offers up the spoils of this war that he fought without any help from Viserys and won. He offers up the spoils to Viserys, kind of soothing his ego and maybe not completely, but kind of smoothing things over, right? Like he says the right things and does the right things to smooth over what could have otherwise been a pretty contentious conversation. And so with that, he's pretty much welcomed back into the fold. There's like a mending of rifts here, right? You have Viserys and Daemon kind of smoothing things out between themselves. And at the same time, Alicent and Rhaenyra smoothing things out between themselves as well. And I think part of it is that I think it was a little bit janky how Viserys and Alicent went about announcing their relationship, right? Given the friendship that existed between Rhaenyra and Alicent. I would have thought, Alicent probably should have given Rhaenyra a heads up, Viserys as well, instead of just springing this on her at the same time that they told everyone else. Alicent has still been trying to reach out to Rhaenyra, and it kind of works here where it offers an opportunity for the two of them to speak on their own and not necessarily work things out, but call a truce for the moment, right? Or at least Alicent is able to put Rhaenyra at ease for the moment. At the same time, Daemon and Rhaenyra have a conversation of their own where they didn't necessarily have drama before, not directly. Daemon took issue with having position really as heir withdrawn. He was never really hostile towards Rhaenyra, but there was some tension with that decision. And indirectly, it was geared towards Rhaenyra. But they take advantage of this day of reconciliation to also smooth things out between themselves. And so at least within these 4 characters, they've kind of smoothed things out and seem to be on better footing. And so as a part of that, he, in a sense, I guess, being the cool uncle, invites Rhaenyra out for a night on the town, where they go into, I keep wanting to call it Flea Bottom or something like that, but I feel like I might be mixing it up with something else. But anyway, they go out into what's like the red light district of King's Landing, where they call them the small folk, but like the regular people are. And given who they are, they go out in disguises so that people wouldn't recognize them and they'd be able to move about more freely and kind of observe things as just regular common people. I don't recall from within the book, but it seems like at least within the show, Rhaenyra doesn't really have the opportunity to move about like this. She's dressed as like, some raggedy little boy. Daemon has on a hood and whatnot. So with this, they're able to move about and to kind of get a more realistic feel for what's going on out there. And then like what the people think, what they're saying, how they feel. And there are a few different scenes that take place. One of which is they happen upon like a kind of play, which is of all things about the royal family and this whole thing of the succession. And the reality is, from like the crowd's participation, from their reaction, that few, if any of them, are receptive to the idea of Rhaenyra being queen. And so that leads to some conversation between her and Daemon where she kind of like poo-poos it. But Daemon states, well, this is a feeling and a belief that quite a number of people have, that they don't want a woman sitting on the Iron Throne. They don't even really want him either. Most of them think that Aegon should be heir. She comes across her Christian Cole. He's like the guy that pretty much guards her, right? And so while they cross paths, he allows her to continue on her way. But from there, Daemon then takes her even deeper into where it's pretty much like a sex den kind of setup, pretty much about that, where, it's like just random people. Well, let's not say random. We don't really know what their situation is, but it's like a lot of people seeming to hook up and whatnot, carrying on. It's a bit of an orgy, like group sex situation. And I get being the cool uncle, and I know we have to kind of like give some creative license and suspend disbelief with the show, because going back earlier in the show and even early on in like the book, you have brothers and sisters marrying, and people marrying their relatives is quite accepted. It's frowned upon really within the book, but it's allowed for the Targaryens because that's their customs, and there's been wars and whatnot fought over, and nobody wants that smoke right now. But yet still, it still feels kind of icky watching it, because you know that Daemon is Rhaenyra's uncle, and like him kissing her, him even taking her to this place feels a little bit icky. And then them being there and kissing, and it seemed like it was going to lead to more, and thankfully it didn't. It's just, I still felt uncomfortable. But that then, I guess she's like all, revved up, for lack of a better term. And upon returning to the castle, goes and seeks out Sir Christian Cole. They end up getting it on. Which, I feel like, obviously there would be some unhappy words about this because of his station, and he's taken some vows and things like that, where pretty much he's taken the vow to dedicate his life to the protection of the king and royal family and whatnot. And this kind of stuff is frowned upon. But he seems like a more appropriate suitor out of everyone else. Like, Daemon is kind of gross. Not the character, but the situation, it's like incestuous and kind of nasty. So it's like, I don't see that as a valid option. And the other suitors, like the old man and the young boy and whatnot, he seems like the best candidate. But it's actually the way that they set it up is actually pretty interesting, because these vows that he's taken are very important. They're very important to him. And so it goes on for quite a while, this thing of him undressing, where he wears like a suit of armor and whatnot, and then this cloak as well, which means so much to him. And it's a little bit awkward because I don't think like he's coerced necessarily, but Rhaenyra shows up and he kind of wants to leave the room to do the right thing, but she persuades him otherwise. And you can see his apprehension in removing his armor and removing his cloak, where on a number of fronts, number one, he gets found in her room. That's going to be serious problems for him. Number two, he's taken these vows. Number three is like, is he really into her like that? And I think the answer to that is probably yes. But it's a matter of he's taken this great risk, because should they be found out, he can find himself in serious problems for a number of reasons. Rhaenyra is less likely, her father's probably gonna would probably yell at her and carry on and whatnot, but wouldn't really pose much of a physical threat to her. But it's just interesting. I actually found the setup between Cole and Rhaenyra, like, that's more acceptable than her and Daemon, or her and the suitors that we've seen thus far. So it's like, so in that regard, I don't have an issue with it. Rhaenyra and her shenanigans with Daemon are reported to Hightower. Rhaenyra, certainly she's carrying on. Like, she was up to some nonsense. And she's out in public carrying on, and it's like, it's reported back to Hightower. He's always like off in some corner having some shady looking conversation with somebody, trying to pull strings from the shadows. And you see that that's happening here, where he has people out, kind of spying, or at least reporting back on Rhaenyra. So far in this show, he's been the only person that we've seen, but this was like a really big thing in Game of Thrones, where these schemers, let's say, they would have their network of spies and whatnot who would be out and about and would report information back to them, which they would then use for their benefit or to manipulate situations. This speaks to Daemon, where it's a little bit... I kind of went back and forth as to what exactly was going on, because you would think that Daemon would know better, right? Like, it's one thing to take Rhaenyra out into the town, but then it's like he went a whole kind of left and taking her to this pleasure house, and then it's like you hear and you like kissing her, and I was like, oh my goodness, like this whole uncle-niece business is a little bit much. It's like the sun doesn't even rise, and Hightower already knows about it. And then it's like, to add to it, that they know about Daemon, but that, imagine the fallout if they found out about Sir Christian Cole. You know, like that was the person that she actually had intercourse with. You know, things kind of stopped with Daemon, and it was like, I don't know, I'm a little bit confused. Like, what was the deal with Daemon? Was his goal to put her in this situation where it calls into question her virtue? It might spoil her odds of having a successful engagement in marriage to another powerful house? You know, is it to kind of besmirch her reputation so that maybe somehow he might kind of put himself back in line to the throne, which I would think that's not the way to go about it. You know, because you're sullying her reputation, the king is probably going to be angry at you. It's like, what do you stand to gain by doing this kind of stuff? And the reality is that Daemon probably wasn't thinking. Like, he just does a lot of nonsense. You know, he's, don't get me wrong, like, he's a solid fighter and whatnot. He's, to some degree, loyal to Viserys. But at the same time, it's like, he's just completely irresponsible. And just lacks self-control. Like, Daemon gets in his own way. You've just repaired your situation with Viserys, and it's like, you know, the cement hasn't even dried, the rivets haven't even, like, really fit into place, and here it is that you're burning the bridge already. And it just points to why he's really unfit to be next in line to the throne. But at the same time, you have Rhaenyra as well, where it's like, when you look at it, she kind of shares some of the same qualities as Daemon. You know, of them being very impulsive. Viserys isn't a perfect king, but he means well. You know, he doesn't really bother anybody or anything like that. He tries to do the right thing. He tries to do what's expected, what's best for everyone. And sometimes that might mean that he's a little bit too diplomatic, maybe. But he's not like a terrible king when you think about it. You know, he's not really a weak ruler either, because when it calls for it, he is willing to kind of lay down the law. But it's like, with family, like, I kind of feel for this dude, because with a daughter like Rhaenyra, and then you have your brother Daemon, and then here's this kid Aegon coming up, it's like, boy, you got problems. You have your work cut out for you with these family members. They're a hot, flaming mess. And then it's like, to add to it, while your two thus far named heirs, right, putting Aegon aside, while they're giving you problems, Rhaenyra actually rightly points out to him, because he doesn't fully place blame on Rhaenyra for what took place, but at the same time, he holds her accountable for her role. You know, for not using good sense, that this isn't a situation you should even allow yourself to be in. You know, never mind that Daemon kind of guided you towards this. You should have had the good sense to remove yourself from the situation, to think about your reputation. And it's like, it can be argued that Rhaenyra is arguably unfit to be king for much of the same reason that Daemon is. That they're both very impulsive, they're selfish, they want what they want. They don't necessarily think about, like, the greater good. And so it's like they're two sides of the same coin. But for Viserys, it's like, Aegon is too young to make the call really as yet for him to be heir. At least he's not willing to as yet. Again, he kind of tries to stress to Rhaenyra the importance of taking her responsibilities and her duties seriously. And it's like you kind of get lip service from her, but time and time again you see that she's really just going to do her own thing. Rhaenyra actually makes a pretty astute observation that Hightower is a problem. How can you be an advisor to the king where in so many different areas you're operating according to what's best for you?
Thanks for tuning in. To ensure you don't miss any episodes, subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell, go ahead and click the thumbs up button if you like what you saw, and go ahead and share it on social media.